This PowerPoint presentation is part 1 of Unit 3, Awareness of Protection and Safeguarding in Health and Social Care, Adults and Children and Young People, Early Years and Childcare. It is part of the Level 1 Certificate, Introduction to Health, Social Care and Children and Young People Settings by Plato Training. The aims and objectives of this session are that by the end you will have an understanding of protection and safeguarding in health and social care, early years and childcare, which includes adults, children and young people. You will have more understanding and be able to define safeguarding children, protection of vulnerable adults, child protection. You'll be able to identify indicators of abuse and explain what to do if you suspect abuse. You will be using your workbook to answer the questions, and it's important that you look out for the green box on each of the slides, usually on the right hand side, to show you which question the slide relates to. It's important that you do share your own ideas when you're working through the PowerPoints. You can use the ideas but expand, put them in your own words. They're here to guide with pointers, but sharing your own ideas, it demonstrates a more and stronger understanding of the content, and if you do wish to progress to the next level, it shows you're able to do wider reading and have an understanding of a topic that's up for the discussion. Now, before we look at this session, I just want to just talk a little bit about safeguarding. I understand that safeguarding is not the nicest subject for us to be looking at, and you know, some of you may have your own experiences, hands-on experiences, and so it's important that if you need to take maybe a little time away, you know, pause the video, take a little time out, because it's, as I say, you know, it can be upsetting when you're thinking of when you are looking at these different areas. Here at Plato Training, we have a safeguarding officer, so if there are anything that you want to discuss when you start looking through this session, anything that you want to discuss further, you know, please just contact your tutor and they can, you know, they'll be able to help, support. Maybe you could discuss with our safeguarding officer or put you in the direction of some support, other agencies that might be able to help you. But you know, we do understand that it's not the nicest thing to be looking at, but as I said, it's important because it's going to be our responsibility when we're working in the care environment to protect the people that we're caring for. So we're going to start looking at the protection of adults, and you will see that the next few slides relate to question number 1 in your workbook. And we're going to start by looking at the definition of protection of vulnerable adults. And you'll see it's individuals over the age of 18 years who are vulnerable because of a disability or illness or unable to take care of themselves. Protecting an individual's health, well-being and human rights, working to keep vulnerable adults free from harm or neglect. So adults are people who are over 18 years of age. But who is a vulnerable adult? So you will see here there are 8 descriptions of different adults. I'm going to read through these and I want you to be thinking about, out of these 8, who you think are vulnerable. Think about the slide before when it talked about the definition. So the first one is an adult in their 20s with a physical disability, so they use a wheelchair. The second one, a person aged 19 who lives alone. The third one is a single parent of 3 children. Number 4, a lady in her mid-30s with Down syndrome. Number 5, an adult who has broken their leg, so they use crutches. Number 6, an elderly widow who has just returned home after a knee replacement and has no family nearby to help. Number 7, a man in his mid-40s who has learning difficulties. And number 8, an older adult with dementia. Now, as I said at the beginning, I want you to have a think about those before you move on to the next slide. And, which do you think? And it doesn't matter if you get it wrong, just out of those, who or how many of those are vulnerable adults? You can talk to the other members on the group chat if you wish to. If you wanted to do this as a small group exercise and you were on the question at the same time, that's absolutely fine. So you will see on this slide that there are 4 green ticks, and those 4 green ticks are next to the ones, the adults who are classed as vulnerable. Number 4, a lady in her mid-30s with Down syndrome. Number 6, an elderly widow who has just returned home after a knee replacement and has no family nearby to help. Number 7, a man in his mid-40s who has learning difficulties. And number 8, an older adult with dementia. Now, you may be surprised that there are only 4. You may have thought there were more. Sometimes people, when we do this, when we look at this exercise, they'll say, well, an adult who has broken their leg and using crutches could be a vulnerable adult. But actually, the adult, they've broke the leg, they're using crutches. It could be short term. They may get used to the crutches. There will be support available, but it'd be something that they'll get used to, and as I said, it's just short term. Whereas an older adult with dementia will need more care, and it's not going to be short term, it's going to be over a longer period. So that adult with dementia will need support from other people to support their care. And just to reiterate what was said on the previous slide, that the vulnerable adult, so there were the person with Down syndrome, the person with dementia, there was illness and frailty after a knee replacement. So the Department of Health says a vulnerable adult is a person aged 18 years or over who is or may be in need of community care services by reason of mental or other disability, age or illness, and who is or may be unable to take care of him or herself, or unable to protect him or herself against significant harm or exploitation. So this is why living alone, being a single parent, using a wheelchair or using crutches does not make someone immediately classed as vulnerable if they can still take care of themselves. So we're now going to look at risk factors for abuse of vulnerable adults, and there are, this is the first of 2 slides that's going to look at that. So the first one is the lack of mental capacity. So being unable to make a decision in their best interests. Increasing age, so someone relying on others to make the right decisions to provide support for them. Being physically dependent on others. So if somebody needs help to get washed and dressed or help with money management, people can take advantage of this. Low self-esteem, so if somebody lacks confidence, they may be unable to say no. Somebody might have a previous history of abuse, so to them it might be normal and they might accept it as part of life. Negative experience of disclosing abuse, so somebody may have already tried to disclose that they're being abused, but because nobody would believe them, then obviously they're going to have a negative experience from this. Social isolation, so no one to talk to about the abuse or neglect that is happening. And lack of access to health and social services or high quality information. So if somebody's isolated, how can they get the help and support they need if they only see the abuser? So vulnerable adults are protected by the law, and the Protection of Vulnerable Adults scheme was introduced by the Care Standards Act in 2000, and this aims to ensure that no one is allowed to work in the care sector if they have ever abused, ever neglected or otherwise harmed a vulnerable adult in their care or placed them at risk. The POVA, which is the Protection of Vulnerable Adults scheme, is checked via a DBS check. Now, DBS stands for Disclosure Barring Service, and that is it's a thorough check. So you may have heard people say you need a police check when you're working in care. Well, this is the police check, and it looks very in depth at individuals to check that they are actually safe to work within the care sector. So how do we protect vulnerable adults? Now, when we are working with vulnerable adults, we have a duty of care to protect them. So we do this by assisting them in taking care of themselves. So this can include personal care, washing, dressing, toileting, all these personal care needs that an individual need, we have to assist in that. We promote good health and well-being, so we provide leisure activities. We might take the people out to a leisure activity, or it might be if we're working in a care home, we bring somebody in to support that leisure activity. Healthy lifestyles, so providing healthy food, again the leisure activity, the exercise, providing that to help with the health and well-being. We need to respect human rights, especially privacy, dignity, confidentiality, and throughout the health and social care course, we look a lot more around privacy, dignity and confidentiality as well as in this session. We also need to work to protect them from abuse, harm or neglect. We've talked about vulnerable adults, we've looked at who they might be, and some of these vulnerable adults are not able to take care of themselves how they used to, or so it's important that we as the adults working with them are there to protect them from harm, abuse and neglect, because it might be that they can't tell you that they're being harmed, abused, so it's important that we work with them to protect them. So the first question, question number 1, and it's asking you to define protection of vulnerable adults. So you need to show your understanding of what the phrase means. Use at least 2 to 3 sentences and develop a small paragraph. Don't copy from the websites. Instead, put it into your own words. You can use the information from the slides as well, but always put it into your own words. So what I suggest you do now is you pause the video and you go to your workbook and answer question number 1, and then once you've done that you can move on to the next question. So we're now going to look at safeguarding children, and you will see on this slide it relates to question number 2, and it is a definition of safeguarding children, and that is promoting children's well-being and development, preventing impairment of children's health or development, and protecting children from maltreatment. The NSPCC says that safeguarding is the action that is taken to promote the welfare of children and protect them from harm. Safeguarding means protecting children from abuse and maltreatment, preventing harm to children's health or development, ensuring children grow up with the provision of safe and effective care. So we're going to look further into safeguarding and what it means. So for a few minutes, you've just listened to the last 2 statements there, but just have a think, what does it mean? This is something that you can discuss on your group chat if you want to, but have a few minutes just to think what it means before you move on to the next slide. Okay, so safeguarding is everyone's responsibility. Now, we may look a little bit more on this later on through the session, but it's really important for you to understand that safeguarding is your responsibility, no matter what. If you're working with children in the care environment, you have a responsibility to protect children and keep them safe. You need to protect vulnerable adults and children. Safeguarding means protecting the health, well-being and human rights of vulnerable adults and children at risk, enabling them to live safely, free from abuse and neglect. It's about people and organisations working together to prevent and reduce both the risks and experience of abuse or neglect. And the primary aim of safeguarding is to keep an individual safe and prevent further abuse from occurring. So you'll see here 6 principles of good safeguarding practice by the Department of Health for England and Wales. Empowerment, protection, prevention, proportionality, partnership and accountability. So you can have a look some more, you can do some research on these 6 principles. If you look on the internet, you'll be able to find some more information to support you when you're looking through the safeguarding unit. So this now brings you to question number 2, and it's asking you to define safeguarding children. You need to show your understanding of what the phrase means, using at least 2 to 3 sentences and developing a paragraph. As we said earlier on the last question, it's really important that you don't copy from websites. You need to rewrite it and put it into your own words. So you can pause the video here now while you answer question number 2. We're now going to look at harm and abuse, and you will see that this slide relates to question number 3. And harm is when someone gets hurt because of neglect or abuse, and abuse is when a person or people treat someone very badly. So we're going to look and give you a more understanding of the main types of harm, abuse and neglect when protecting vulnerable adults. So what I would like you to do, have a look at the different types of harm, abuse and neglect which are listed down the left hand side. So you've got physical abuse, sexual abuse, neglect, emotional and psychological abuse, financial abuse, self-harm or self-neglect, discrimination and institutional abuse. Now you can pause the video here and do some research and have a look at some of the types of harm and abuse that I've mentioned there, and then have a look at what examples could be for the main types of harm, abuse, of neglect in a vulnerable adult. And you can do this, and then once you on the next slide it gives you some examples. Okay, so hopefully you will have thought of some examples yourself from research from the last slide, and this slide is giving you some more examples. So examples of the main types of harm, abuse or neglect in a vulnerable adult. So physical abuse, so this could be physically hurting a service user by hitting, pushing, grabbing. A sexual abuse, by raping or undertaking unwanted sexual activity with service users. Neglect, not giving help, support or medical care. Emotional or psychological abuse, so shouting at a service user or threatening service users. Financial abuse, so this could be by using a service user's money, by using their belongings bought with their own money. Self-harm or self-neglect, so not reporting concerns of self-harm, not supporting or reporting their self-neglect. Discrimination, so examples of discrimination being racist or sexist, not wanting to care for someone because of their race or gender. And finally, institutional abuse, so examples by not allowing a service user to have a person-centred care, giving them no choices, effectively treating everybody in the care the same. And that is institutional abuse. When we look further throughout some of the other sessions, you will look at person-centred care, and you will see everybody's different. So by treating everyone the same, we're not being fair to them, and that's classed as institutional abuse. So these slides still relate to question number 3, and we're going to look at different types of abuse now. And there are 6 main types of abuse and 4 other categories of abuse. Before you move to the next slide, do you know any different types of or forms of abuse that may happen? Have you heard of anything? So, just think about that for a few moments before you do move on to the next slide. So the 6 main types. So number 1 is physical abuse, and this may involve physical violence, misuse of medication, inappropriate restraint or sanctions. Sexual abuse, so this may involve penetrative rape or oral or non-penetrative acts, rubbing, kissing, touching clothing. Creation of pornographic images, being made to look at sexual images or acts. Psychological abuse, including emotional abuse, threats of harm or abandonment, deprivation of contact, humiliation, blaming, controlling, intimidation, harassment, and verbal abuse. Number 4, financial or material abuse. So this includes theft, fraud, exploitation, pressure in connection with wills, property, inheritance or financial transitions, misuse or misappropriation of property, possessions or benefits. Number 5, neglect and acts of omission, so including ignoring medical or physical care needs, failure to provide access to the appropriate health, social care or educational services, withholding medication, adequate nutrition and heating, they're all types of neglect. Discriminatory abuse, so this could include racist, sexist or abuse based on a person's disability. These are the other 4 types of abuse as listed in the Care Act 2014, and they include domestic abuse, and this within domestic abuse can include psychological, physical, sexual, financial, emotional abuse, so-called honour-based violence, modern slavery, and there's been a lot over the news just lately about slavery, and this includes slavery, human trafficking, forced labour and domestic servitude. And there's actually a car wash in Levenshulme where workers were found to be modern slaves. Organisational abuse, this can include neglect, poor care practice within an institution or specific care setting such as a hospital or a care home. And self-neglect, which includes a wide range of behaviour neglecting to care for personal hygiene, care for health or surroundings, and include behaviour such as hoarding. So you're now going to look at question number 3, and it's asking you to explain the term harm, abuse and neglect in the context of protecting the vulnerable adults. In your answer, you need to show the main types of harm, abuse and neglect for adults. You need to explain, so you need to give reasons to your answer. So you might find it helpful to use conjunctions, so the joining words. So for example, such as because, therefore, but, however. This will help you to give the reasons in your answer. So you need to also ensure you write in at least 2 to 3 sentences, and again developing a paragraph within your answer. So pause the video here now and answer question number 3 in your workbook. So the next 2 slides, this one and the one after, there are some statistics and they look a little bit on modern slavery. So again, just use these slides, have a look through them, have a read what it says on them. You can look further into this yourself, but it talks about slavery, and that slavery still does happen today in modern times. And you may have heard just recently, may have seen on the news in Leicester, where there were some people working in the Boohoo factory, and they were being really underpaid for the work they were doing, and that is that is classed as modern slavery. So have a look through both the slides, and like I say, there's some statistics on there, you know, affecting children and adults. And so, you know, it's important that you know about these sort of things, because you may come across an individual that might be in a position, might be working in a factory like that, and you know that it shouldn't be and it's not right. So again, you know, you can try and do something about that to help that person. And here is the second slide for you to have a look at. So we're going to now look at question number 4. So these slides relate to question number 4. And the first one is understanding the main types of harm, abuse and neglect when safeguarding children. So it's a similar activity, similar exercise to what we did with the adults. And I want you just to look at the types of harm, abuse and neglect, and you know, for a few minutes you can pause it and have a think, or have a look at some examples that could be the main types of harm, abuse and neglect. So you'll see that the type of this physical abuse, the sexual abuse, neglect, emotional abuse, bullying and institutional abuse. So you will see here some examples of the different types of harm, abuse and neglect. So for physical abuse, that could be hurting a child by manhandling, hitting, shaking or pushing them. Sexual abuse, raping a child or showing them sexual images. Neglect, not meeting the physical needs such as cleanliness or psychological needs such as praise and love of children. Emotional abuse, telling children they are unloved or worthless. Bullying. This could involve various methods, so it could be verbal intimidation, physical bullying, so for example hitting. It can also be very common via technology, so texting or cyberbullying via the internet and mobile phones. And you know, technology is a massive part of the lives of children nowadays, and you do hear a lot of the cyberbullying. Self-harm, so allowing a child to self-harm and not reporting concerns or offering support to them. And institutional abuse, so treating all children the same regardless of their needs and differences. So you're now going to look at question number 4, and you're going to explain the term harm, abuse and neglect in the context of safeguarding children. Within your answer, you need to show the main types of harm, abuse and neglect for children. And to explain, the same as the last question, you need to give reasons to your answer. You may find it helpful to use the joining words such as because, therefore, but, however, and that will help you give reasons within your answer. And again, ensure you write at least 3 to 4 sentences and develop a small paragraph. So you can pause the video here now while you answer question number 4. So the next few slides relate to question number 5, 6, 7, 8 and 9. And we're going to look at some of the indicators, some of the signs of abuse, harm or neglect. Okay, so you'll see on here there's adults and children. So indicators, signs of abuse for adults, so there may be behavioural changes, they may be withdrawn from activities and social life, not being able to concentrate on tasks, being unable to fall asleep or stay asleep, and having a lack of confidence. So they're all indicators and signs of abuse, harm or neglect. And then if we look over at the children, some of them are similar and there is a few more. So behavioural changes, so in adults and children, you know, you get to know people in your care, adults and children, and you'll get to know if their behaviour changes because you'll get to know them really well. Attention seeking, you know, if a child becomes attention seeking, there may be reasons for that. Withdrawing from friends and teachers, not being able to concentrate on the schoolwork, tiredness and falling asleep in class. You know, these are all signs and symptoms that something may be happening at home or to them. Having a lack of confidence in their ability to do tasks. So it's really important that you need to have an awareness of the signs of abuse, harm and neglect. When you do become to work in in a setting, in a health and social care setting, of children, young people, adults, you will get to go on more safeguarding training. You'll have safeguarding policies and procedures in place. So, this is a starting point for you to look at the signs and symptoms of harm, abuse and neglect. And but it's something that you will do further training on, and you will update that training as well on a regular basis. So you'll see on this slide there's some indicators and signs of physical abuse. So the first one is unexplained bruising. So it might be that you've spotted a bruise on somebody, and they've said they don't know how they've got it, or they may do, but they're obviously not disclosing it to you. So any sort of bruising that you've got concerns about, which is unexplained. So, and also grasp marks, finger bruises, burns or skulls, broken bones, frequent fractures of the fingers and toes, and behavioural changes. So, for example, attention seeking, withdrawn, being angry, lashing out, lack of confidence, the inability to sleep, and tiredness. Here are some of the indicators and signs of self-harm. So having cuts on the wrists, slash marks on the wrists, scratch marks, behavioural changes. So for example, attention seeking, withdrawing, being angry, lashing out, lack of confidence, and the inability to sleep and tiredness. The indicators and signs of neglect. So if somebody could be constantly hungry, they may be stealing food, they may be dirty and smelly, they may be wearing inappropriate clothing for the weather. So it could be a really hot day and they'd be wearing hats, gloves and coats, or it could be on the other side, it could be cold and they may be wearing small thin clothing or sandals or no coat. So clothing that's inappropriate for the weather. Clothes on inside out or back to front. They may have broken bones, frequent fractures of the fingers and toes, and behavioural changes. And you will have noticed this is the third slide. We've looked at 3 different types of abuse, and actually behavioural changes is on each slide because we need to know, we're not the experts in this field. We need to have an idea of what the signs are, and it could be similar signs for the different types of neglect. Of abuse, sorry. So behavioural changes, so attention seeking, withdrawing, being angry, lashing out, lack of confidence, and the inability to sleep and tiredness. The indicators and signs of sexual abuse: bruising to the genital area, cuts to the genital area, bruised buttocks, frequent urine infections, STIs, pregnancy, using inappropriate sexualized language, so in children and people with learning difficulties, disabilities, and behavioural changes again, attention seeking, withdrawing, being angry, lashing out, lack of confidence, and the inability to sleep and tiredness. So indicators and signs of financial abuse, which relates to social care, not childcare. So suddenly unable to pay bills when they used to be able to manage it. Missing personal possessions. So for example, items of jewellery, money being withdrawn from bank accounts, a change in the person's will, and behavioural changes, so attention seeking, withdrawing, being angry, lashing out, lack of confidence, and the inability to sleep and tiredness. They're all indicators and signs of financial abuse. So what should you do if you think a child or young person or service user is being harmed, abused or neglected? Now remember at the beginning we said it's everybody's responsibility to safeguard, okay, and to protect adults and children in our care. So here are some do's and don'ts of what you need to do. So do ask the person, the child. Do listen to them. Do reassure them. Do tell them that you're going to report it to help them. Do make notes using the person or the child's words. Do follow the safeguarding policy at your work, and do report your concerns to the safeguarding team. And it's really important that you look at the don'ts. So don't ask any questions. If they're open, this may be leading. You need to listen and just find out what they're saying. Don't promise you can keep it a secret. This could be another form of abuse as well, because if you tell them you're not going to tell anyone, if the you're going to have to tell someone. If you want to protect this person, this child, this adult, it's important that you don't promise. And again, it's really important that you do find out what your procedures are, but a good way of remembering what your responsibilities are the 5 R's. So recognise, respond, report, record, refer. Okay, really important, like I said, everyone has a responsibility. Please don't ignore it. If you've got concerns or somebody, a child, an adult, tells you something, you need to respond. Don't think somebody else might do it. So for example, if you were working in a nursery and you know that that child goes to another nursery or they're due to start school and you've got concerns, they may tell you something or you recognise something, don't think, oh, well, they go to the other setting, that setting will deal with it. That's, if somebody comes to tell you something, it may be the hardest thing they've had to do, so you really need to respond. You need to report. Recording is really important as well. Find out what your procedures are. You may have, a book that you have to record, a system in place, but you actually record it on. But if you've not got anything right at that moment, just jot it down on a piece of paper, just because you need to record exactly what's happened, what's been said, what you've heard. I once was involved within a safeguarding situation when I was a registered childminder working from home, and a young child disclosed some information to me, and I had to had to take it further, and I did make a record of what happened. However, when it actually did go to court, unfortunately it did, and the report that I'd written, I'd put something like, oh, the child was talking to me for like 5 minutes, but they were looking at, well, actually, was it 5 minutes or was it just a few seconds when they said that to you? So, just make it clear what's happened, as clear as you possibly can, to make it easy for somebody to pick up and understand what's been written, because that will be given to the safeguarding officer, and then it may be investigated further by other agencies as well. So it's really important that you do make it a clear recording, and obviously, as it says, refer it to the relevant people. So we're going to now look at question number 5, and you've got this case study also in your workbook, and there are a few case studies, then they're all in the workbook. And what I want you to do, I want you to read through each of the case studies, and there is a question after each one. I want you to think about the slides that we've looked at, the signs, the symptoms, and what you would do in this situation. And, remembering it's the procedures in place. We don't discuss it with other people. We report it to the safeguarding officer. So thinking about all these things that we've looked at in the last few slides. So I'm going to read you through Toby. You are working in a nursery and a new child aged 2.5 has joined the nursery today. You introduce yourself and ask him questions like his name and his favourite colour and his favourite toys. This is to try and to get him to settle in. He says he is called Toby and he likes red cars, so you find 2 and play together. During the time you spent with him, you notice a bad odour, and as you continue playing, you notice that Toby's t-shirt is inside out and his shoelaces are knotted rather than tied up in a bow. You also notice he has dirty fingernails when he crashes his red car into yours. So I want you to think about that scenario, think about Toby, and then what I want you to do, I want you to answer the 3 questions below. You must relate your answers to the scenario, so they must be about Toby, and ensure you write your answers in full sentences. So question number 5A, what could be happening to Toby? What signs of abuse, harm or neglect are there regarding Toby? And what actions would you take next to protect Toby? So as I say, use the slides before to think about Toby and his situation and, what might be happening to him. If you have a highlighter pen, or you can underline, so use the look at Toby's story and just make some note, underline some of the areas, highlight some of the concerns that might be happening with Toby there to help you in answering question number 5. So we're now going to look at question number 6, and this is Rory's story. So you're working in a mainstream secondary school as a teaching assistant. You've been working with the same student, Rory, for the last 2 years, and he is now in year 9 and aged 14. Rory needs a lot of support in the classroom as he has dyspraxia, meaning he gets distracted easily and trips up often and finds it difficult to concentrate. Rory is generally well behaved and sometimes quiet, but today he will not speak at all, which is out of character for him. When you ask him questions, he will not even look at you. It's like he's not listening at all and does not want to respond. You keep trying throughout the day, but eventually, after lunch, Rory mumbles, "My granddad hurt me." He then pushes his desk in front of him, throws his chair, narrowly missing another student, storms towards the classroom door, swears, then slams it loudly on his way out. So using Rory's story, you now need to answer the 3 questions. What could be happening to Rory? What signs of abuse, harm or neglect are there regarding Rory? And what actions would you take next to protect Rory? Again, make sure you write your answers in full sentences and use the slides from before to help you understand what might be happening to Rory. So we're now going to look at Jenny. You're working as a support worker for adults with learning disabilities. You were doing a one-to-one shift today with a 30-year-old lady called Jenny who has Down syndrome. You were going bowling, then going to a cafe for lunch. At bowling, you asked Jenny what she has been up to, and she says she has a new friend called Michael. You ask how she knows Michael, and she said he is her boyfriend and to keep it a secret. You are unsure who Michael is, but you need to find out more. At the cafe, you asked Jenny where she met Michael, and she said he is her tutor at her college art class. She tells you that they are in love and are going to get married. She then elaborates and tells you he kissed her with his tongue and it points between her legs. She is very excited and happy about the idea of being in love with Michael. So use Jenny's story to answer question number 7 and think about what could be happening to Jenny, what signs of abuse, harm or neglect are there regarding Jenny, and what actions would you take next to protect Jenny, again using the previous slides that we looked at earlier on. We're now going to look at Pavinda. So you're working as a home carer for a lady called Pavinda who has multiple sclerosis, and you were helping her to go food shopping at the local supermarket. You browse the store together and chat as you push her around. She appreciates you taking your time with her as she doesn't get out often. At the checkout, she says, "You can take my loyalty points. That's what the other carers normally do." So use the story of Pavinda to answer the 3 questions below. What could be happening to Pavinda? What signs of abuse, harm or neglect are there regarding Pavinda? And what actions would you take next to protect Pavinda? Ensure you write in full sentences. So you're now going to look at Barry. You're working in a residential care home, and as you walk down the corridor, you noticed a carer called Jade laid in bed with a resident called Barry. Jade is cuddling up to Barry, and Barry is crying. So use Barry's story to answer the 3 questions below. You must relate your answers to the scenario and ensure you write your answers in full sentences. And you need to say what could be happening to Barry, what signs of abuse, harm or neglect are there regarding Barry, and what actions would you take next to protect Barry. And now you've looked at all 5 scenarios, you'll see there's a review here with what might be happening to those particular individuals. So you will see the first one, Toby, the child. So it could be neglect Because Toby is smelly, his clothing is smelly, did someone help him to get dressed or not? Has he had a wash? Ask him who he lives with at home, and you need to report to the safeguarding team. You've got Rory, the teenager, so it could be physical or emotional abuse. So, there's withdrawal, so not speaking, he's angry, he's aggressive. Rory needs to talk to someone to see what's going on with his granddad, and you need to report to the safeguarding team. The young adult, Jenny, so it could be sexual abuse, emotional abuse, or a position of power. Disclosure of her teacher being her new boyfriend, disclosure of sexual encounters, can she consent? Is it true? She needs to talk to somebody, and you need to report it to the safeguarding team. The older adult, so Pavinder, so this is financial abuse, so using somebody else's loyalty card, so for example a Tesco club card, it's financial gain from the service user and can be against the policies, and you need to find out who takes the points and who that carer usually is, and report it to the safeguarding team. And the elderly adult Barry, this could be emotional abuse or sexual abuse. You witnessed the scene, you saw Barry crying, why is he upset? Is Jade his key worker? And you need to report this to the safeguarding team also. So you will see that within all 5 situations, all 5 scenarios, they all say report to the safeguarding team. So that's important to understand that that is part of, if you've got any concerns, you see something, you hear something, you need to report it to the safeguarding team, and then they will look into these things further. So that brings us to the end of this PowerPoint presentation, looking at the safeguarding part 1, and you should now be able to have more understanding of the protection and safeguarding in health and social care, early years and childcare with adults, children and young people. You should be able to define safeguarding children, protection of vulnerable adults and child protection. You should be able to identify the indicators of abuse, and you should be able to explain what to do if you suspect abuse.